the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 272, Close the Gender Loophole in Ohio's Rape Law. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, coming to you live with strep throat again. Because I can't just get it once. I had to go back for seconds, guys. It was just so good. But I'm here with Nonsense Annihilator, Lauren Brooks, and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson. And tonight, we're going to read over the text of that letter that I talked to you guys about last week, also to be used for an online petition, which I promised when we discussed the case of Miranda Smith, who recorded and distributed video of herself sexually imposing herself on her 2-year-old son, and then her sentence was reduced because the Ohio Supreme Court decided that Ohio's rape law didn't hold that being forced to penetrate made you a rape victim. So the 2-year-old is not a rape victim because he is a boy. So let me get that. Well, I'm going to go ahead and finish my little spiel here. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And let's open the page here. Oh, and I do have a thanks from Derek Workman for introducing you guys to Kay Valentine. I'm very glad to. I think what he does is very important. People not paying attention to women's criminal behavior allows women to get away with egregious crimes, and you end up with people of both sexes and all ages getting harmed. There's a lot of abuse that's perpetrated by women in caregiving positions like school teachers and nursing home workers and stuff like that, mothers. So it's really important that we remain aware of that, because there's a whole class of potential victims that we can't protect if we can't acknowledge that women can do bad things. Which is what this show's about today. So, what I plan to do with this, before we go over this, what I plan to do with this letter is, as I was talking about last week, I'm going to send this to my representatives at the state level, to my governor, and to my state's attorney general, And I'm also going to create an online petition with this as the text of the petition so that people can actually sign on to it and ask the Ohio State Legislature to change the wording of the law. And we'll see if we can get them to do that. And in future shows then, if I get contact back from those offices that I'm sending this to, I will update as well. And this is actually kind of a long letter. We'll read it, and as I'm reading, if you have suggestions or things that you think need to be added or reworded or things like that, go ahead and comment. And if you're listening to this later, post your comments, and I will, look into those and look into editing it before I send it out. Sorry, I'm going to sound bad sometimes throughout the whole show, because I really do have strep throat. I just started the stupid antibiotic the second round today. But in any case, if we don't get all the way through it today, we'll continue it next week. So that's how this is going to go. So starting out, the body of the letter and what the petition will be is... It has become a matter of public knowledge, following the case of Miranda Smith, who recorded and distributed video of herself sexually imposing herself on her 2-year-old son, that Ohio's state law against rape has a gender-based loophole. Historically, this has been an ongoing issue with sexual violence legislation. As laws against various types of violence evolved around the protection of women and girls, male victims have historically been omitted from consideration. Legislators may have even believed existing law protected both sexes, but according to the Ohio Supreme Court, Ohio's rape law only protects victims who are sexually penetrated. If the sexual assault involves penetration of the perpetrator by any part of the victim's body, even against the victim's will, the Supreme Court of Ohio has ruled that the crime does not constitute rape. This omission, while perhaps an act of neglect rather than malice, represents a discriminatory standard set by the state in regard to the human right of bodily autonomy. Under existing law, an intimate attack by a perpetrator imposing sexual intercourse without the victim's consent is deemed a lesser offense if it is done by enveloping the victim's genitalia, rather than it is if the perpetrator engages in the same imposition while penetrating the victim's genitals. So, what I wanted to get across in that paragraph, the fact that we're discussing a human right of bodily autonomy. But I also didn't want to make the letter super long, so I sort of included it all in one sentence. So you guys will have to tell me if I need to break that up, or if that's all good.
So this is the letter that you wrote?
Yeah, this is the letter that I wrote. And I'm going to be sending this to legislators, to the governor, to the state attorney general, because the state attorney general does compose legislation to submit to the legislature to get it voted on as a potential law. He writes bills. In fact, the governor used to be a state attorney general and wrote bills for this purpose, and actually may have written the previous existing law thinking that it would work for both sexes. Because you would think, since it doesn't say specifically penetration of the victim, it just says penetration, that would cover both penetration of the perpetrator or the victim. But the state Supreme Court has determined that only means penetration of the victim.
Yeah. You're missing a little something there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what we read last week was egregious. Just
Yeah.
absolutely egregious. I mean, we're talking a 2-year-old child who cannot consent, on whom his own mother sexually imposed herself, filmed it, made porn of it, and distributed that porn. So his own mother exploited him as a subject of child porn while raping him, and the state decided that she wasn't a rapist and that her penalty should be that of a lesser crime because
Yeah,
penis.
I just remembered how fucking disgusted I was by this story the first time. I had somehow gotten to the point where it was almost scrubbed out of my mind, but
Yeah.
yep.
So any feminists who are hate listening to this, since you guys brag about getting rape law changed to include male victims by the wording that is essentially the wording Ohio law uses, I do expect your signatures on this petition, and I welcome them. So that's something that like we should all be united on. You want women to be equal. That includes equal accountability, and I believe that the state is more conscientious about sexual violence perpetrator um, rehabilitation programs for people who are convicted of higher crimes than for people who are convicted of more minor crimes. So this is definitely something that you should want for female perpetrators, that they get the right label and that they get the right state assistance in rehabilitating themselves as well.
Agreed.
Mm.
So but you're sending this to your Ohio legislator, right?
Yep, Ohio legislators, because this is Ohio's state law.
So, but would we have to be residents of Ohio in order to sign
The petition?
to sign on to this? Yeah.
When I put it up so I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to send it to the legislators. I'm going to send it to politicians who are usually participants in writing legislations. Or bills to be passed to legislation, and I'm also going to put it up as an online petition that will be drawn to their attention. So that way you'll have it. It doesn't just have to be people from Ohio. It's important that Ohio legislators see that the public outside of Ohio sees what the law does and whether or not they address this loophole. Because it's an embarrassment to Ohio. Like it's an embarrassment, in my opinion, that our and in fact I mentioned that later in the letter. Our legislators failed to protect our male citizens against an egregious crime that they've been told by feminists over and over again is the worst thing that can happen to you, even worse than being murdered. So obviously, if it's going to be the worst thing that can happen to you, and it's even worse than being murdered, then there should be no gender protection for perpetrators.
Right. Well, see, the only thing about that is when it's a female rapist and she rapes a man, she can then extract his sperm, get pregnant, have a child, and extort that man for money.
Yep.
For which she'll have to go through the court system, and the state gets kickback for every child that's in the system. So please, someone show me how we can fix this, because it's just a never-ending cycle of money exchanging hands, and nobody's actually giving a fuck about the kids.
Yeah. And when you think about it, some of the victims are kids.
Yeah.
Imagine facing an obligation to pay financial support to your rapist for another child when you are just a child, a young teenager, or even as young as 11 years old. Like, that'd be crazy.
Yeah.
But that happens to boys. And that is also something that I addressed in this letter. So, going on, such a loophole deems the human right of bodily autonomy to be a gendered right, respected and protected when the human in question is female, but given a lower standard of protection when the human in question is male. This discriminatory standard raises the question of whether the state of Ohio considers men and women to be equally human with the right to equal protection under the law, or whether the state considers men and boys to be less human than women and girls, and less deserving of human rights protections that our law and policy offers to women and girls. It should take no more questions than that to inspire Ohio legislators to update the law to close that loophole. If something is a human right, it is the right of all human beings, not just one sex or the other.
Right.
Just as important as equal protection under the law is equal accountability. And this is something that I also wanted to emphasize, because when we talk about equality, we all the time talk about equal rights. But we are the only people that I hear talking about equal accountability. MRAs are the only people I ever hear talking about gender equal accountability. Feminists don't talk about it. Conservatives don't talk about it. Liberals don't talk about it. Progressives don't talk about it. Communists don't talk about it. Just MRAs. The sex of a crime victim does not define or characterize the actions of the perpetrator. Contravention of a human's bodily autonomy or exploitation of one's ability to consent reflects the same disregard for one's welfare, whether one is male or female. The sex of a perpetrator should also not determine one's level of culpability for criminal behavior. Trespass against another human being does not become less malicious or less callously exploitative because the violator is female. Being female does not make a person less capable of appraising her actions or exercising self-control. It should not reduce one's accountability for respecting the human rights of other people, including the right to bodily autonomy. So, my question on that one is, does it sound too harsh for legislators? Or have I made a point?
I like how it throws into question the idea of what is female, and it sort of gets around the whole thing. Like, even if you identify as female, that doesn't matter, because even if you identify as female, you should be able to face the same crimes as someone who identifies as male. Mm-hmm. And yeah. I think that's what's going to annoy lawmakers the most, the fact that it is unigender, for want of a better term.
It's what I think all law should be, unigender.
Well, by gender.
All law should ignore the fact that there are male and female people, and just regulate things on the basis of whether they do harm or not, and provide services on the basis of whether they are needed or not. If we're gonna have government and we're gonna have laws and they're gonna affect people's lives, they shouldn't have a different effect on the lives of women than they do of men. And this is something that feminists say over and over again that they want. That the law should not affect women differently than it affects men. So this is an opportunity to support changes in legislation to make that happen. That the law will not affect women differently than it affects men. And Xeranx gives us $5 and says the term is unisex. Yep, unisex. Meaning that it applies regardless of your sex. So the law only has one sex. The White House sends one. Come on, man.
Justice is supposed to be blind, right?
Yeah. So going on.
And maybe there really aren't even two genders. There's only one, the unisex party.
There we go. That's what we need, the unisex party.
If we got too many genders, maybe we should run with it in the other direction. There are 0 genders.
There you go. I like that.
That is how the law should be.
There you go. That's kind of what this whole screed is about.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck genders. Like, arrest criminals.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But see, this is the thing. I mean, people who are elected into office don't want to upset those people because they want to be reelected, right? I would love to think that, I mean, obviously, so far, so good. I'm very happy about this. Of course, I'm going to sign on to this. But I just, how much can we trust any person in that position to go with what is right versus what they think their voter base is going to accept and allow?
Yeah, we shouldn't trust them. We should watch them like hawks. It's one of the reasons why there will be updates, as if I get any contact back from them, and if I don't get any contact back from them, like I go weeks and weeks and I haven't heard anything, we'll do a show about that too. Like, nobody answered me. I wonder why they don't want to talk about this, right? That'll be the topic. And if any of them's willing to, come on and talk about the legislation, that would be great too. I would love that. But at the very least, like, if I contacted when I wrote to federal legislators about the Campus Save Act, which it actually turned out had already passed. The article that had reported on it as a piece of legislation that was under consideration, the writer was mistaken. But so I wrote to all of my federal legislators from Ohio, and even a couple that were not my legislators but were for other districts. And I wrote to both of the senators, and the only person who wrote back to me was our Democrat senator. And he wrote me a bunch of bullshit. I'm not kidding. Like, he did not read my letter, and it was obvious it was written by an intern, who didn't do well in English, grammar and composition in school. There were mistakes. I published it in A Voice for Men. I made a meme with the senator's official image because those are public domain. I gave that bitch some bullshit. Bitches love bullshit. But yeah, that because that pissed me off. But I don't expect it to be that bad at the state level, because as you drop down in levels, politicians are more likely to respond. So I'm hoping I'll get at least a few people that will respond back to me. I expect that at least one will respond with, the law already covers boys, and here's how. But it doesn't with specificity. And my answer is basically going to be, I don't think the Supreme Court is going to interpret anything less than exact specificity to cover boys. You could say a million ways that this applies to victims of both sexes, this applies to perpetrators of both sexes, but if you don't have the word penis in the law, you are not going to get the Supreme Court's approval for convicting rapists who sexually exploit somebody with one. So there you go. But I went on with this discussion about equal treatment because I wanted to really hammer home. So the next thing I said in here is, if ensuring that the state of Ohio offers all citizens equal treatment under the law is not enough, the impact of sexual violence on male victims provides ample reason to update the standard. So I've referenced it one more time, sort of in a segue to victims deserve equal protection because they're equally wounded by this. Male victims are physically endangered and often harmed when they experience intimate attack. Physical force can injure a man or boy just as it can injure a woman or girl. Males are as vulnerable as females to infectious diseases that can be transmitted during sexual contact. Neither the sex of the victim nor that of the perpetrator changes the fact that these injuries can result from an intimate attack. The law should not treat that risk as more acceptable when it is inflicted by a female perpetrator or upon a male victim.
Right. Because, I mean, outside of a few genital diseases that you contract by sex, a woman penetrating a man with an object is not going to necessarily transmit disease, unless there's actual like skin to skin contact.
Right.
So it's completely overlooking that fact that men are completely vulnerable and just as susceptible to contracting disease. I mean, geez.
And there are sexually transmitted diseases that can cause cancer.
Right. And so there was just a report released that Mumia Obsidian Ali is talking about on his channel, how the rate of STDs, and I think it's in Houston, has increased by 128%.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just insane what's going on and going around out there. And, of course, you have someone who has one of these diseases, one of these 128% increase motherfuckers, and they decide that they want to take advantage of someone. Well, look, in California, they made it completely, it's not illegal to infect a person with HIV, even if you know that you have it.
Yeah.
They completely decriminalized it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Is that one of the things that has thrown people into the weeds? Because it's very easy for a male to infect a female with HIV, but comparatively very, very difficult for a woman to infect a man with it. I don't know how true that is, but HIV infections account for a pretty small percentage of sexually transmitted diseases, and people are generally aware of those things. We've experienced the fear porn scare campaigns ever since the 80s, and everyone's aware of those problems. But the vast majority of STIs can go in either direction because they're sort of they're not based on fluid, they're based on just contact.
What people don't realize is with the advancements that we've had in treatment for HIV that can make people non-contagious altogether. Like they can even be, you can even have the medication can get you to a point where it's undetectable in your system. Where testing for it doesn't show it, which makes you very unlikely to transmit it to anybody, right? But
yeah, they're playing ads. They're playing ads all the time over here.
That,
it's
right?
always it's always black people that they have.
Yeah. It's because the black population has been heavily impacted by that particular STD.
Yeah.
But and it's it's maybe unfair, but it's reality. So you want to advertise the treatment to the people that are most likely to need it.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, like, there are multitude of varieties, hybrids, I guess, of HPV, right? Genital warts. Genital warts can cause cancer. It can cause genital cancers, and it can cause throat cancer.
It's going to cause me to throw up in a minute.
Right? So if a woman forces penetration by forcing a man to perform oral sex on her, and she infects him with genital warts, she may have killed him. Some people are very vulnerable to cancer. Some people also are not very good at doing the types of detection they need. Some people use tobacco products, oral tobacco products, chewing tobacco and stuff like that, and make themselves more vulnerable to cancer. And if you have that combination of carcinogens and a disease that makes you more likely to have mutations in your cellular reproduction in your mucous membrane, you are more likely to get throat cancer or oral cancers because of that. So you can, it won't kill him today, or tomorrow, but it's still, you still killed someone if you force them to perform oral sex and you transmit HPV, and down the line, it leads to them getting a cancer that turns out to be deadly because their system is more vulnerable to it, or because they have other added vulnerabilities, So yeah, it's not like you can say that just because the male transmission of STDs comes from, or STIs comes from, something of a gun firing system, and the female version is more of a smear tactic. It still works that way, right? You're still endangering yourself. It's one of the reasons why I tell young men that, don't worry about whether people are socially shaming you or not. Virginity is safe. Be a virgin until you're ready to settle down with somebody that you trust. There's nothing wrong with that. You're protecting yourself against, we're at war with bacteria and viruses. Our species is at war with those species. We now have antibiotic resistant bacteria that actually shoot at the drugs that we use for it. They have a biological weapon that they fire off at the molecules of medicine that bond with this molecule of medicine and change it to something that's not poisonous to the bacteria with, the side effect of water. And it's got a name like hydrolyzing or something like that it is the effect that it has. It neutralizes the antibiotic, so it no longer works. And there's a whole spectrum of these types, and some of them are bacteria that come out of your bowels, and they're called oh gosh, I can't think of the name of the type of antibiotic, but it starts with a C, and they're CRE bacterias, or carbona something-ide resistant bacterias. They're very dangerous. Some of them we have no treatment for at all, and there is now a super gonorrhea. Can you imagine getting super gonorrhea?
Does it wear a cape or some shit?
It is very hard to get rid of. We'll put it that way.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So this is one of those things where, when we talk about this, it's gross. But the bottom line is, when people talk about body counts and all the various crude ways that we can talk about, sex and all that, they have a point. Both sexes have a point in wanting their partners to not have fucked everything that moves.
Right. But then they shame people who don't have sex, or don't have sex as frequently as maybe they do, or the average person. They call them incels.
Yeah.
Incels. Yeah. Look, be proud to be an incel. Keep it in your pants, because these bitches out here, they're dirty. They're nasty.
And it is. This is as much a caution that men should take as women. You are just as much in danger from STIs as women are. You have to be careful, you know. And it's the other reason why I always say, you know, like, yeah, there are dozens of types of birth control that women have, and women should use that. But I don't care if she's using 5 different things. You should still wear a condom. Because it protects you from at least some STIs. Not all. You can still get herpes with a condom on. Right? You can still get HPV with a condom on. But at least, you know, it'll protect you from some STIs. Right? And that's my take on it, you know. You be picky. Be very picky. Vet women for character. Women should vet men for character. That's, you know, and it's definitely essential that we impose equal accountability on perpetrators regardless of their sex, because they put their victims in equal danger regardless of their sex and regardless of the victim's sex, because of just this one factor. STIs are very dangerous, and you know, we've done exactly the wrong thing, I think, in our war against infectious diseases. We enlisted chemicals when we probably should have been more aggressive about, you know, forming unspoken treaties with beneficial microbes instead. Let them do the fighting for us. So, you know, or at least made that the primary thing we did, and we didn't, and now we may not be able to. So, but going on, I felt that it was very important to get that across, that injury is not something that, you know, size doesn't affect that injury. It's not something that you can say, well, women are less likely to do this because they're smaller and weaker. No, if she's got herpes, she can pass that to you no matter whether she is bigger and stronger than you, or whether you could break her like a twig if you wanted to. So, and I went on to say male victims are financially endangered and often harmed by their intimate attack. Erection and ejaculation are not voluntary actions, but can occur even if the victim is averse, afraid, or in some circumstances physically incapacitated. In other words, you don't get whiskey dick from GHB.
Right.
Right. Or from being out of your mind on other drugs that cause you to lack awareness, but don't depress your system. Right. So, you know, these things can happen, and even if you did, you know, again, there have been women who have committed sexual assault by orally raping a guy instead of raping him vaginally, and we've seen news stories where at least one of a college student who did that to a guy and then accused him. So there's that. These autonomic responses to stimulation do not constitute consent to anything. An intimate attack can result in conception against the male victim's will. Unlike female victims, male victims do not have any opportunity to terminate a pregnancy that was conceived by their partner's assault against them.
Perpetrators assault.
Yeah, by their perpetrator's assault.
Yeah. You said partners at first. I was like, whoa.
No. It says perpetrator.
Yeah.
I will admit I'm on a few medications. I don't usually take cold medicine because decongestant makes me bitchy, and that's putting it mildly. Decongestant makes me a psycho bitch from hell. But I did take a half a dose.
That.
Oh, jeez.
I
So you know how you feel when someone gets on your last nerve, and then immediately after that, the next thing that happens, how that feels. Well, imagine if you took a pill, and if that pill had a 6-hour time of effect, that for 5 hours after you took that pill, you felt that way. That's I don't know why, but like I can't take regular pseudoephedrine, and the other kind that's okay for my heart. Well, it's not as bad for my heart as the kind that I absolutely can't have. It does that to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't usually take it. I'm like, I'll be ready to strangle someone for 6 hours if I take like the whole dose, but the half dose I'm just a little bit fired up. But it also had a cough suppressant, and cough suppressant sort of, that's why I'm speaking slowly. I've kind of numbed my throat and everything, so I sound probably sound pretty normal, but I sound awfully slow and maybe a little weird in my speech. It's the drugs. I'm not a drug person. I'm really a wimp when it comes to chemical effects and stuff.
Yeah.
So, and it seems like they're starting to really kick in because they weren't at the beginning of the show, and now I'm like underwater. But yeah, this paragraph, what I'm gonna try to get across with this is that when a guy is a victim of female perpetrated rape and a baby is conceived, he is a victim of the imposition of unplanned fatherhood against his will, and he should have the same rights that a female victim has, even if they have to be accommodated in an entirely different way. And I'm not going to argue to legislators that male victims of an intimate assault should have the right to force their female perpetrators to abort if there's a child conceived. But if abortion is not wrong, and if it's a right to control your own body by aborting, in the case of consensual sex, or if the woman is a victim, then there is no real moral objection to giving a male rape victim the right to force his perpetrator to abort if she gets pregnant.
Or at the very least, he shouldn't have to pay for that child directly through child support or indirectly through his taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what I'm asking for is way more reasonable than give guys the right to force their rapist to abort if they get pregnant. So if anybody is looking at this and thinking of it as objectionable, like maybe, again, feminists who hate watch us, that's something to consider. Because I would question whether a woman who commits rape has the right to cry, but my bodily autonomy, when she doesn't want to submit to a forced abortion. But I'm not asking for forced abortion. And so I think it's a fair compromise, what I am asking for here. A male victim has no choice in whether an intimate attack makes him a biological parent. If he does not or cannot take custody of his child, because remember, male victims of intimate attack can be very young, and just like some girls start their periods at 9 years old, even though it's a rare thing, some boys become fertile before they become teenagers. They're not even old enough to maybe have a paper route, but they can conceive a child in that circumstance. And there has been one case that I saw where the victim was 11 years old, and the court imposed a child support obligation on him. An 11-year-old, a 5th grader.
That's just disgusting.
Right? Yeah.
It's the hormones. They're putting it in the milk.
It's quite possibly the hormones, yeah. Well, and it is also quite possibly, like, my friend's doctor, when we were kids and she started hers at 9, said this didn't used to happen, but humans didn't used to receive the high level of nutrition that we do. And so, overall, women's capacity for producing larger babies has come from that, and girls becoming fertile and having to deal with, all of the ins and outs of periods for a longer part of their lives has come out of that. It's like the body is in better shape because of that, and that's affected both sexes. So
I don't know. I might have a little problem with that because this is happening in the hood too, where
yeah, but you might
they're not eating well, and this is not just this generation. This is a generational thing that they eat crap, they live like crap.
But he was talking more about the difference between, like, the starvation diets of humans who had to struggle to find food versus the high-calorie diets that we have today. And even junk food has a lot of calories. In fact, junk food has more calories than healthy food.
Is it a high-calorie thing, though,
yeah.
that would spark, like, an early
Yep. Yep, getting a lot of calories, getting a lot of nutrients can do it, getting a lot of calories can do it. And then, we've got the school lunch program and all that as well. So even kids that aren't getting a lot of nutrition at home are at least getting some at school. So it's just the whole situation. Boys and girls are vulnerable to this. So
they're putting it in the milk. I swear to God, they're putting shit in the food. You can't tell me any different. I mean,
I have a meme about that. I'll send it to you.
You think it's just the milk?
Of course not.
Oh, yeah, no. Although there's not as many.
They put that shit on everything.
There's not as many hormones in your meat now as there used to be, but there's a lot. And then you also have like all the fortified, like, breakfast cereals and all that have vitamins and minerals added to it and all kinds of stuff. So there you go. And then the other thing is a shitload of stuff has soy in it. And soy, like, sort of improves your estrogen levels or increases your estrogen levels if you're female.
Can mimic estrogen?
Exacerbates your estrogen levels if you're male. So it not a good thing, and then
there's seed oils.
Yeah,
seed oils are like the gluten of the right.
Yeah,
it'll make your dick fly off.
Oh, great! And we're gonna have you got a song by King Missile stuck in my head. Detachable penis. Jeez. So I'm gonna go on with this. So I basically pointed out here the victim, where is it? Yeah, I scrolled up too high. Has no choice in whether he becomes a father. If he does or cannot take custody of his child conceived under this circumstance, a male victim may be extorted for child support by the mother, who has custody at least until the birth of the child. Now, in the state of Ohio, if you're convicted of rape, you cannot have custody of a child that was conceived during the rape. And that was one, actually, a bunch of us wrote to Ohio legislators. I was one of many people who wrote to Ohio legislators about that after hearing both feminist protests about it and reading about cases where women who have been convicted of rape. I have the hard time giving the title mother to somebody like that, but women who have been convicted of rape have kept the baby that was conceived during that rape, and then when they apply for welfare, the victim gets extorted by the state for child support to cover her welfare expenses. And so, now the mother cannot have custody. But if they put the child in a foster home, an adult woman rapes a teenage boy that she's babysitting, or a preteen boy that she's babysitting, and gets pregnant, and the state takes the baby, but the child doesn't take custody, the grandparents don't take custody, so they put the child in foster care, the boy is still going to have a child support obligation. If your child is in foster care, the state imposes a child support obligation. So it won't protect the victim. It'll protect the child, which is good, but it won't protect the victim of the sexual violence. So I added on, or by the state on behalf of foster parents. Historically, courts have even imposed child support obligation on male victims who themselves were children, too young to legally obtain gainful employment. This is at least an 18-year-long financial consequence of being raped, an unreasonable imposition on victims of sexual violence that uniquely affects those who are male. Current Ohio law does not provide any victim exemption, yet it is lenient toward the perpetrator who inflicts such a lengthy and serious consequence on the victim, since she would do so without penetrating him. So that puts legislators in a position of having to acknowledge that under current Ohio law, they would be punishing some rape victims by imposing an 18-year-long child support obligation on them.
If the only thing that I would say maybe could be added would be maybe like some actual cases that happened, because saying it is one thing.
Yeah.
But when you point to an actual case where it has happened, then they can't turn away and say, oh my God, this never happened.
Oh, yeah.
Well, no. Here
Actually,
it is.
you have a blog post about that. I can pull those cases, the paragraph with those cases, and add that to this. I'm going to type for a minute. A note so I know to add it.
I got a couple of people in mind that I would like to send this to.
Yeah, send them to me on Discord. Oh, I see what you mean. I thought you were saying a couple cases in mind. But yeah, definitely send the link. I'm gonna be sending it to the National Coalition for Men and asking if they have any advice for anything I can add to it too, because I want this to be rock solid.
Yeah. And so just as an aside, while you're typing, I'll say this. So I got an email from the owner of my business, and basically there's a law that is trying to be passed to allow Tesla to sell cars directly to the consumer in the state of Connecticut. Now, the email that she sent was just, everybody must vote no. You have to vote no. Everybody just please vote no. No argument about why, no listing of, what is actually even being stated or argued in this legislation. Just, no, you have to say no. And I'm guarantee you, because it's a female, I guarantee, because I kind of know a little bit about this woman, she just hates Elon. She just hates Elon Musk, and well, I mean, she has other reasons because of the industry that we're in, but she just does not like Elon. And if he's going to profit in any way, shape, or form in the state of Connecticut, it's nope, can't happen. But I highly doubt that there's a good percentage of the coworkers that would even dare to respond, but then go on and yes, vote no on this thing. I'm pretty sure most of them don't care. There might be some that do, but is there anybody out there questioning this thing besides me? Just because she told me that I have to say no, I want to find out why I need to say yes, because I don't like being told what to do.
So basically, the law is just going to allow people the choice to buy cars directly from a car manufacturer.
Hmm.
What's wrong with that?
Well, because so God, there's a long history, and I kind of wish Packard Tom was here because even though he's a little bit long in the tooth, he well, not long in the
He'll
tooth. He's
know,
a
I
little,
know.
he will know. He will know. But the NADA, the National Automotive Dealers Association, basically has a pact and has been in place for as long as cars have been being sold to consumers in this country. Well, not as long. I'm sure it was a
Yeah.
while before its inception, but um, so that's kind of the contract that they have. Now, when you sell a car over in Europe, you're not allowed to mark up the price of the car. What it is what it is. And they have to figure out how to pay the salesman. I'm sure it's probably just a regular salary or whatever, but I can't imagine that they would earn commission if they're just selling. I don't know. Anyway, but that's not how it works in the United States. When you have the MSRP, that's just the baseline. The dealership can then tack on charges and charge the customer more because just for the simple fact that they're purchasing it through a dealer and not from the manufacturer itself. And I think
What does the S
is
stand for in MSRP? I know it's manufacturer and recommended price, but what's the S stand for?
I think it's standard.
Standard recommended price. Okay. So
Yeah.
here's what I would say about that. That sounds like a cartel.
That's
And,
exactly what it is.
And a monopoly system. And
Uh-huh.
I would think that a person like Musk should be able to sue, but probably won't. If the monopoly it engages in this kind of practices to prevent competition like that. But
Yeah.
in any case, like that seems really hinky and shady, if you ask me.
Yeah, but he
Like,
broke the
so-
mold. He broke the mold in California. Once they let him, they let him do it. You know what I mean? Now it's just a matter of state legislation having going along with the ones that have already allowed him to do it. And he doesn't necessarily need to expand. I mean, people, if you want a Tesla, you know where to go and get one.
Right,
But it would just
but-
make it would make it easier for distribution because I don't think he has any East Coast outlets
Right.
over here. I know he's got Vegas, he's got California. I'm pretty sure he's in Texas too. But like if you go into malls, you'll see like a Tesla. It's like just like the Apple store, right? They'll have a car in there, and you'll have a couple of people in there, and their job is literally to take your order for their car. It's like ordering a car from McDonald's. It's the easiest thing in the world, and it takes away so much layers of just crap.
Of middleman, yeah.
Exactly.
Honestly,
bullshit.
people should be able to do that. I would vote yes on that.
Yeah.
There isn't anything I could hear in that says we shouldn't be doing this. It's lifting a restriction that seems to me to be protecting a monopolistic practice rather than protecting the consumer. So there you go.
Exactly.
But yeah, I don't know if people will think that deeply about it. But that is interesting. I'm gonna engage in this monopolistic practice and ask you to vote or order you to vote a certain way because I hate this man. Says typical woman.
Right.
So there you go. So I've got my little note here for me to add this, and I will go back. That's one of the things that I'll add. And when we talk about this a little more next week, I'll give the updates on this is what it looks like, and hopefully be ready or close to ready to post it as a petition that people can sign on to and share with others and get them to sign on to it. And we'll see what we can get it. Hopefully we can get it changed in Ohio. And if we get it changed in Ohio, that might actually set a standard that will cause other states to reevaluate their laws and maybe federal law too. Because it's important. it's very important that the wording of the law prevents the courts from ruling that the law allows for discrimination, and therefore one perpetrator is less accountable than another.
Yeah.
That actually, and I mean, somebody could always like sue and force the state to change the law, but I think the legislators themselves are going to want to change it to avoid that, and rather than, you know, letting it get to that point. So I went on then to talk about actual psychological vulnerability, because it's one of the things that people don't consider at all when it comes to men. Like, they talk about the lack of physical vulnerability that people believe men to have. You know, like, you're all Superman, you're bulletproof, 10 feet tall, you know, all that stuff, right? And even though we know that's not true, people will treat you like it when it comes to violence committed by women. Well, that's amplified. That discriminatory treatment is amplified when it comes to the emotional effect of female violence. And I think I had a super chat here that I missed. Xeranx gave us $5 and said, intentional transmission of HIV from infected to not was made a misdemeanor in California. This is a result of the advancements Hannah mentioned. Okay, so it's not that it's not illegal, it's that it's a lower crime now, because it used to be flat out murder, but now it just inflicts a long-term medical problem.
Yeah, but who's really getting arrested and going to jail for? I mean,
nobody.
Are you kidding me?
Well, misdemeanor crimes is a very different system of dealing with those.
Yeah.
So male victims are emotionally and psychologically harmed by their attack, even if they don't have to confront the complicated emotional considerations of imposed, unplanned, and unwanted parental status in a culture that treats all involved fathers as willful deadbeats. So, and that's another one. It's sort of a segue between, there is an emotional component to being made a dad against your will, right? Because if they don't want to be dads and they want to back off of that and not be part of the child's life, not pay child support, even though fatherhood was imposed on them via rape, they'll still get called deadbeats, right? But even if conception doesn't happen, female victims, though they may not be universally supported in their recovery, do have community and justice system support, but sparse representation in the justice system and advocacy community can isolate a male victim, leaving him on his own to deal with emotional trauma that it can include feelings of anger, powerlessness, shame, disbelief and shock, anxiety, fear, emasculation, and depression. While suffering these reactions, he may experience a lack of compassion from even those in his own social circle, as female-perpetrated intimate attacks on male victims are often treated in popular culture as positive or humorous experiences for the victim, giving the impression that he would not need their consideration. However, just as a female victim does, a male victim may feel made unclean by the experience, especially if anything about the nature of it violated his moral, ethical, or religious code, or if the assault inflicted upon him included a sexually transmitted infection. He may feel dishonored, exploited, violated, or duped. A man raped by envelopment is likely to suffer confusion or cognitive dissonance, as the memory of his body's involuntary reaction and his knowledge of how sex works compete with his knowledge that he did not want what was done to him. His experience of emotional pain related to the rape will likely compete with his understanding of society's attitudes toward about men and sex, and in particular, the expectation frequently displayed in popular culture that men always want and appreciate sexual content or contact. He may question his own sexuality because of social attitudes about men and sex. You know, guys get asked when they say they have been a victim of a female perpetrated rape. You know, what are you, gay? You know, and if he is, then he's just been shamed for it. And if he's not, you know, what is that? Like, how dare you not want this woman that you were not attracted to or that you were going to choose not to sleep with? How dare you get upset that she took away your choice in the matter? What, are you gay? Like, what kind of question is that? And yet almost every guy that I've talked to that has disclosed to me that he's been a sexual violence victim, that had a female perpetrator, has told me that somebody asked him that question. What, are you gay? Like, why would you say that? You'd have to be an idiot. There must be a lot of idiots in the world. But that's something that, you know, nobody ever asked me when I've said, yeah, I've been a victim of male perpetrated sexual violence. Nobody's ever said, you know, you didn't like it? What, are you, a lesbian? You know, nobody's ever said that to me. He may blame himself for the experience. Even if his attacker was violent, even if he protested, even if he was averse to the attack, even though he was averse to the attack. If he is involved in an intimate partner relationship, he may even experience a sense of guilt, as though he had betrayed his partner by being raped. And I knew one guy whose partner knew the details, used the word rape to describe what happened to her fiancé, and then called him a cheater for experiencing it. Like, treated it as if he actively and willfully betrayed her by getting raped. So that was, in my opinion, the perpetrator is guilty of inflicting an experience on him that affected his relationship with his partner. Now, granted, his partner was an asshole, but that's a lousy way to find that out.
Yeah.
Because boys are trained from early childhood to be more stoic than girls, male victims are more likely to internalize their emotional responses to being raped. Having learned to keep private any experience of vulnerability, self-doubt, hurt, anxiety, or fear, they cannot simply flip an emotional switch and begin explaining these responses to others after an emasculating experience. They may even be ashamed to admit such vulnerability. Having been raised to be independent or self-dependent, many men and boys are ill-equipped to seek help in assessing and addressing the emotional fallout one experiences following a rape. They may feel obligated to put on a brave face or carry on as if they are unaffected by the experience.
I think you might also want to point out, and I don't know if this would even serve this letter well, because this is amazing so far.
Oh, thank you.
But, you know, I think I would bring up something about how when, you know, these hotlines, right? Like if you've been an abuse victim, call these hotlines. Well, when men call, what do they get told? They said, oh, well, if you're an abuser and you need anger management, press this button. You know what I mean? They don't.
Yeah. They get treated like they can't be victims.
Exactly. So even if there is help, where is it? How do they find it? Because it seems like they just get shucked and jived at every turn, you know?
Yeah.
And when you're in that situation, if you've even got the temerity about you, if you've even got your wits about you to try and find help, how does it feel when everywhere you turn you get shown the door or get told that you're the problem?
Yeah,
You know,
that
it
actually
makes
is a really important point. And I'm thinking after I say they may feel obligated to put on a brave face and carry on as if they feel unaffected by the experience, I'm going to have to say something about them having to look harder for help.
Yeah, the lack of...
Yeah, this... Let's see, this predisposition to difficulty in seeking help is compounded by a lack of availability or available resources for men. And maybe not lack, but a dearth of available resources for men. And I'll add that at the end of, or after the end of that sentence, and point out how does one go about searching extra hard for what one isn't inclined to seek, and what society isn't inclined to provide.
Yes.
There we go. Okay, so going on, evidence shows that many are profoundly affected. According to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, common experiences shared by men and boys who have experienced sexual assault include anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, flashbacks, and eating disorders, avoiding people or places that remind them of the assault or abuse, concerns or questions about sexual orientation, fear of the worst happening, and having a sense of a shortened future, feeling less of a man or that they no longer have control over their own body, feeling on edge, being unable to relax, and having difficulty sleeping. A sense of blame or shame over not being able to stop the assault or abuse, especially if they experienced an erection or ejaculation, withdrawal from relationships or friendships, and an increased sense of isolation, worrying about disclosing fear or judgment or disbelief. Fear of judgment or disbelief. A review published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1998 by William C. Holmes, MD, MSCE, and Gail B. Slapp, MD, MS, Sexual Abuse of Boys, Definition, Prevalence, Correlates, Sequelae, and Management, noted that sexually abused boys, including those who did not consider themselves victims, presented an increased rate of a broad range of issues indicating trauma. They reported that sexually abused boys experienced twice the rate of low self-esteem, behavioral problems, and antisocial personality disorder. They are 4 times as likely to experience major depression and could be up to 14 times more likely to attempt suicide, twice as likely to run away from home or have legal problems, and 3 times more likely to have bulimia, are up to 5 times as likely to report sexually related problems, including sexual dysfunction. The reviewers also found an increased rate of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, borderline personality disorder, paranoia, dissociation, somatization. That's, for anybody that doesn't know, that's like sleep disorders, anger, aggressive behavior, and poor performance poor school performance, gender role confusion, and insecurity about intimate partner relationships with both men and women. A publication titled Sexual Assault, Males by the National Center for PTSD makes similar statements about both adult and underage male victims, including the fact that men and boys who have been sexually assaulted are more likely to suffer from PTSD, anxiety disorders, depression, substance abuse, and a tendency to engage in risky behavior than those who have never been abused sexually. The impact is clear. It is just not as widely acknowledged. It should be unnecessary to address the question of whether sexual violence against male victims is common enough to merit legislative change. A crime does not have to be common to be a violation of the right of its victims, or an act for which its perpetrators must be accountable. However, it would not matter if rarity would excuse ignoring the loophole. Researcher Laura Stemple, evaluating data from national intimate partner and sexual violence surveys, found that sexual violence against male victims is more common than many would believe. According to her report, when victims who were made to penetrate were taken into consideration, the rates of non-consensual sexual contact basically equalized between the sexes. Just about as many male respondents reported having been victimized as female respondents. Meanwhile, a 2017 report on sexually violent women, published in the official Journal of the International Society for the Study of Individual Differences, found that overall 10% of women reported perpetrating sexual violence. Let me reread that sentence for you guys.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, a 2017 report on sexually violent women, published in the official Journal of the International Society for the Study of Individual Differences, found that overall 10% of women reported perpetrating sexual violence.
Jesus.
Remember that M&M's thing that the feminists like to say about men and rape?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That, yeah, poisonous bitches.
Speaking as a poisoned M&M, I am insulted and offended.
There you go. If the rate of female victim experiences and the presumed rate of male perpetration have constituted an emergency that must be addressed with legislation, policy, funding, and information campaigns, then would the same not be true of the equally high rate of male victim experiences and female perpetration? At the very least, state law penalizing the crime of rape must not discriminate by failing to protect male victims or reducing the accountability of female perpetrators. So here's where we get to the request. I've given all that information, made all those arguments, made all those points. Now I'm going to tell them what I think needs to be changed. In light of the existing loophole and the danger it presents to men and boys, we petition Ohio's representatives to do the following two things. And there's 2 bullet points. The first one is update the state's definition of sexual conduct under Section 2907.01 of the Ohio Revised Code to include acts of sexual imposition that involve oral, anal, or vaginal envelopment, no matter how slight, of the victim's penis, so that doing these actions without the victim's consent would unquestionably be considered rape under Section 2907.02. The reason I worded it that way is because currently that section designates that definition to be just acts of sexual imposition that involve oral, anal, or penetration, or involve penetration no matter how slight of the oral cavity, the anal cavity, or the vagina. So instead of saying that penetration only affects women, now we're talking about the victim being forced to penetrate. And the second bullet point is create a legal pathway and reasonable time frame for rape victims to terminate their parental rights and responsibilities toward a child conceived during their rape upon conviction of the perpetrator. A victim should be able to do this without requiring agreement from the perpetrator or having to fulfill any requirement other than to establish that the child was conceived during the crime for which their perpetrator was convicted. So that basically, like, feminists have argued that men shouldn't be able to do this because then all quote-unquote deadbeat dads, which I don't believe there's such a thing as a deadbeat dad. I think if you bring a child into that circumstance as a woman and you know that you're inflicting that status on a man, you're the deadbeat. But feminists have argued that all quote-unquote deadbeat dads will just accuse women of rape. Sorry. Which I think is projection. Like, oh, if they have this victim status they can use to get out of responsibility, they'll make false allegations. Well, why would you think that?
Right.
Right? But if it requires a conviction, that's a different story. You know, obviously they would have to then go to court and testify. They would have to have made a police report. They're going to have to go through what a rape victim goes through when they go through the system to hold their perpetrator accountable before they can use that system to terminate their parental rights. But I think that's fair. I think you shouldn't be able to use allegations of rape to terminate parental rights in either direction, whether, you know, it's the victim terminating his own or the state terminating the perpetrators without proving that that's what really happened, that it was definitely a rape. That should require proof, right? So that's basically those are my two requests. When I finish up with there is no valid excuse not to do this. Ohio law should not include discrimination against either sex. Please take quick action to eliminate this embarrassing and intolerable blemish on our state's relationship with its citizens. Thank you for your kind attention. And then I have some links at the bottom here to one is to a study that I referenced. One is to the Stemple study, and then one is to the Holmes and Slapp study for male victims. And I'll probably put some more links in there because I did reference some other things, so that if the people that I send this to want to look and confirm that the sources say what I'm saying that they say, then they'll be able to do that. Dean Domino 25 gave us $4.99 and said false allegations are their tools to use. If you let men terminate parental rights, you're taking their toys away. That's why they're so against it. Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right. So, I'm going to keep this article up. I'm going to keep obviously the live stream will remain up. And I'll keep looking at comments on the live stream and everything. If I make a lot of changes, then we may have a follow-up reading next week. But within the next few weeks, I'm going to finalize this. And when I have a petition to ask you guys to sign, I will make an announcement of that in a future episode. So it should be sometime this month, because I want to get this ball rolling as quickly as possible. This is, in my opinion, this is a very serious situation, and it's been this way for a year. So just saying that before we go on any super chows, and any brave, keep wanting to call Rumble Brave because I use Brave browser. But any Rumble rants and that, I just wanted to make sure and mention that. So just sort of watch this spot or listen to the show, future episodes. Listen for me to update this. And let's see. There's the Super Chow channel. Alright. And there is... Alright, after Brian typed done from the Super Chats from his show, somebody posted another at 10:30 in the morning. $15 for the fundraiser that ended yesterday. That was not Faber 451. Sorry for being late. And not Faber, thank you very much. Meredith G gave us $5 at Showtime today and said HBR Talk 272. Honey for the Badgers, thanks for the thought-provoking conversation. Zapier gave us $5 and said, if we can't view males as victims when their genitals are mutilated, I can see why people would minimize female on male rape. And that is true. Like we live in the United States. We live in an environment where it has been not just legal, but socially accepted and common for degloving part of the genitalia of infant boys as a medical treatment for like 90 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's been, there have been campaigns to promote that. And there's been research funded specifically for the purpose of making it look like an important thing to do. Like how it is an uphill battle to get people to understand that attacks on men, genital attacks on men, are as egregious as they are on women.
Yeah.
But he goes on and says, it's only when it's done to females it's viewed as atrocious. Child gender reaffirming is now called mutilation, but intactivists have been calling MGM child mutilations for decades. But now that girls are regretting their decision to mutilate themselves, that's getting attention. I've been seeing intactivists not advocating against MGM as much because they're more concerned with mastectomy and FTM bottom surgery. Yeah, we should be able to recognize that all of those things should not be done to children. If an adult decides they want to do that to their body, it's their choice. They're an adult. They're ready. You know, obviously, a lot of psych eval would need to be done if somebody hadn't come to that adult and said, "Hey, look, you have a medical problem that necessitates this." But aside from, that caveat that, you definitely want to try to dissuade that kind of thing even in adults. In children, there should be no question. They can't consent to that. They're not able to fully appraise the consequences and the severity of changes that are going to happen to them. Like, that's baloney. But, of course, there's politics attached to it, so... And, of course, since it's being done to girls more often now than it was before, because most transgender surgeries were done on male patients up until about mid 20 teens. You started seeing a huge uptick in Canada in female to male transgender status, mostly among autistic girls. Big push there for some reason. But in any case, yeah, that definitely is another area where we should be seeing more people to come together on that. And it should get people to recognize that, we've really paved the way for that by condoning the cutting of baby boys' genitalia unnecessarily. Richard Bier gave us $5 and said, "There's a thing where the absence of a biological father is strongly correlated with early onset menarche." Oh yes, that's true. That is true. Girls will become ready to have babies earlier, physically at least, earlier in their lives, if they don't have a father in the home. This could be due to the absence of identifying pheromones in the environment, which would cause someone to go into reproductive mode at an earlier age. And it's probably, in my opinion, and I'm commenting on him again, in my opinion, that's probably an evolutionary thing because in the course of, although there's evidence that hunter-gatherer societies actually were not gender divided the way people thought they were, the protectiveness of men cannot be denied, and a female without a male to protect her might be more likely to go into reproductive mode because that would net her a male to protect her. But he goes on an unrelated note, the city of Elucid, Ohio has had to lock the park AED in a cabinet that you have to call 911 to get access code to open it from because it keeps getting stolen. Oh man, that's a defibrillator for the general public. It electrocutes you, or not electrocutes you, but it shocks you to restart your heart. People are stealing the emergency medical treatment device. Jeez.
Jesus Christ.
Zapier gave us $10 and said, so a male that forces the victim to give them oral, and then it is rape. But if they force if they forces the, he's commenting on if a male perpetrator forces a female victim to give them oral, or a male victim to give them oral, it is rape. But if a female perpetrator forces the victim, a male victim, to give them oral, it's not rape. Because he's forced to penetrate. If a female victim forcibly engages in oral on a male victim, it's not rape. Because, again, she's forcing him to penetrate. So yeah, that's the situation now in Ohio. And unfortunately, that's not going to change until we persuade legislators to get more specific, more explicit in the law, because the state legislature apparently interprets it that if men are not mentioned specifically, they're not included. Let me find my Rumble. I did it again. Sorry, guys. Let's see here. Where's the stream? Alright, and I see... Excuse me, sorry. I see chat. Don't see super chats or super rumble rants. Mr. 303 says they pull me back in. Meredith G says yes they did, and has a little whale post. Somebody posted hormones, WHORE moans. Which you guys know the joke, right? You know how to make a hormone?
Don't pay her.
Don't pay her. Oh, and I'm sorry, Betty Adams mentioned, is she breaking up? Voice for anyone else? Yeah, I probably am. And hopefully that will not be so bad next show. But that, I think, is all of our super chats. There's no paid Rumble rants to read. So, thanks everybody for listening. I know this was a rough listen because the stuff I'm talking about is infuriating and depressing. But it's a situation that I think is changeable, and I'm hoping that if we point these things out to legislators, that they will make the law, they'll change the wording of the law so that it will explicitly hold perpetrators who violate men and boys accountable, and it will explicitly hold female perpetrators accountable, and it will prevent the state from imposing child support obligation on rape victims. And with that, thanks everybody for listening to all of that. Thanks to my two co-hosts. Thanks to anybody that's commenting on this, and anybody that leaves a comment on the video. I'll be continuing to look out for potential things to add or rewording or anything that you think should be done. Thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.
Night, y'all.
Good night.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.